When my own parents sold my 11-year-old daughter's antique cello, the one my grandmother gave her for $87,000, and poured that money into a backyard pool for my sister's kids, they didn't just take an instrument. They took a child's voice, her dignity, and her sense of safety right inside the very home that was supposed to protect her. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now, let's listen to him from the heart. I didn't notice the silence in the car until Mira filled it. She was in the passenger seat with her music binder on her lap and a little plastic tin of rosin balanced on top like it was something precious. It was. The rosin wasn't worth much, but it was part of her routine, one of those small familiar objects that makes a kid feel steady in a world that changes too fast. The real weight wasn't in her hands, though. The real weight, the antique cello my grandmother had given her, didn't live with us. My apartment in Sarasota was clean and safe and tight. The walls were thin. The neighbors complained if a TV got too loud. A cello that old wasn't something you left near an AC vent and hoped for the best. And Mira, God help me, didn't play like it was a hobby. When she played, her whole body went somewhere else. She disappeared into the sound like it was a door only she could open. That cello had its own room. At my parents' house in Lakewood Ranch, my grandmother Evelyn had kept a music room the way some people keep a chapel. Temperature controlled. A humidifier that hummed softly in the corner. Shelves full of yellowed sheet music. A cabinet with a little lock because she believed in boundaries even when the rest of my family treated that word like an insult. Mira had been looking forward to practicing there all day. Not in a yay chores way. In a this is mine way. She hummed under her breath as I drove, tapping rhythms on her knees, already halfway inside that focused little world she lived in when she had a bow in her hand. "Do you think Great-Grandma Evelyn will be there today?" she asked, pulling her ponytail tighter like a kid who still believed elastic could control the universe. "She's at her place," I said. "Not today. We'll call her later." Mira nodded, but her eyes stayed hopeful anyway. Like maybe Evelyn had changed her mind overnight and come back because she missed the smell of my dad's aftershave and my mom's passive-aggressive sweetness. Mira didn't have the language for my family's dynamics. She just knew Evelyn had been the one adult in that house who looked at her like she mattered. We pulled into the driveway and the first thing I noticed was the mess. Not junk, my mother didn't allow mess. This was controlled chaos. A contractor's kind of chaos. The kind that only shows up when someone spends money they didn't talk about. I had a key. Not because I was trusted, because I was useful. There's a difference. One gets you love, the other gets you access codes and errands. When I opened the front door, the smell hit me so hard it was almost a sound. Fresh paint. Sawdust. That sharp chemical bite that says someone has been sanding ceiling and trying to make old things look new. And somewhere deeper in the house, muffled through walls and closed doors, I heard the whine of power tools. Mira's face lit up. "Are they fixing the music room?" I didn't answer right away because my brain was doing that slow buffering thing it does when reality doesn't match the script. I stepped inside and immediately saw blue painter's tape stretched across the entryway, like a polite warning: don't touch anything, don't question anything, and definitely don't ask how much it cost. A tarp covered the hallway runner. Cardboard boxes lined the wall in neat stacks labeled in my mother's sharp handwriting. It felt like walking into a house that was mid-surgery. Mira tiptoed like she was in a museum. "Mom," I called loud enough to reach whatever part of the house my mother currently ruled from. No answer. Dad, still nothing. Mira drifted toward the back window and I followed her, half to keep an eye on her, and half because my gut was already tightening. "Whoa," she whispered. I looked out and felt my stomach drop. The backyard looked excavated, like the earth had been peeled open and rearranged. A big rectangle had been carved out where the grass used to be. Piles of dirt sat like small mountains. There were forms along the edges, rebar stacks of pavers and bright orange flags marking lines like a battlefield map. It wasn't finished, but it wasn't subtle either. A pool. A full-on, in-ground pool. Because why quietly improve your life when you can broadcast it to the neighborhood with heavy machinery? Mira blinked and her voice went soft with hope. "Is that for us?" There was so much light in that question that I actually hated everyone I was related to in that moment. Not because a pool was evil. Because I'd been around long enough to know that in my family things like this didn't come from generosity. They came from priorities. And Mira wasn't high on the list. I don't know, I said carefully. Let's get your cello. We walked down the hall toward the music room. That room had always been Evelyn's territory, even when she lived here. She'd made it into a sanctuary humidifier, humming quietly a faint smell of polish and peppermint tea sheet music, stacked like history, and a simple rule that didn't exist anywhere else in this house: respect what's not yours. Mira loved that room. She said it smelled like clean wood and tea. I said it smelled like someone who still believed in boundaries. I pushed open the door. The humidifier was still running. The stand was still there. The chair was still angled the way Evelyn always liked it, facing the window like music deserved sunlight. But the corner where Mira's cello case always rested, where that instrument lived like it belonged to her, was empty. Not moved, not put away. Empty. Mira didn't scream. She didn't even inhale. She just froze, like her whole body had decided if she stayed still, enough reality might change its mind. Then she walked to the corner slowly, like she was approaching an animal that might bite. She looked down at the spot, looked up at the shelf, looked behind the chair like maybe it had fallen and no one had noticed for several days. Her fingers drifted toward the edge of the stand, expecting to feel something real. Wood. Weight. A familiar curve. And when there was nothing, she pulled her hand back fast, like she'd touched a hot stove. She turned to me and her voice got small, careful, like the question itself might get her in trouble. Did Great-Grandma Evelyn change her mind? My throat tightened so hard I almost couldn't speak. No, I managed. Mira swallowed. Her eyes went glossy, but she didn't let anything fall. She nodded once too hard, like she was forcing the moment to behave. Then, "Where is it?" she asked. She didn't sound angry. That would have been easier. Anger is clean. Anger belongs to someone who believes they're allowed to be upset. Mira sounded like someone trying not to take up space. I didn't answer because I didn't know. Not for sure. But I could already feel where this was heading, and I hated that my kid was standing in the middle of it. "I'll be right back," I told her, keeping my voice steady on purpose. "Stay here, okay?" Mira nodded without looking at me. Her gaze stayed fixed on the empty corner, like she was waiting for someone to put her future back where it belonged. I left her in that room because I needed her not to see my face when I found out who had done this. I marched toward the kitchen, every step heavy with a question I didn't want answered. Who took my daughter's cello? My mom was in the kitchen, of course. She was always in the kitchen when she wanted to look like she was holding the family together with her bare hands. A mug in one hand, her phone in the other, hair pulled back in that "I've been busy" way that in my family usually meant busy ignoring something. My dad sat at the table scrolling through something on his tablet, calm as a man who believed the world would always make room for him. And my sister Delaney was perched on a stool with a drink that looked like it cost $12 and tasted like lawn clippings. She didn't look up when I walked in. She barely ever did. "Where's Mira's cello?" I asked. My mom blinked slowly, like she was confused why I'd bring up something inconvenient during her morning coffee. "Good morning to you too, Talon," she said. I stared at her. "Where is it?" My dad sighed long and practiced. "What's the problem now?" I felt my heart do that annoying thing where it tries to climb out of my chest and find a quieter family. "Mira's cello," I repeated. "The one in Evelyn's music room." "Where is it?" Delaney snorted without looking up. "Oh my God." My mom took a sip of her coffee like she was buying time. "Your father handled it." Handled it. That word is a red flag printed in cursive. Handled it, how I said. My dad finally looked up. His expression wasn't guilty, it wasn't even defensive. It was bored. "We sold it," he said. For a second the room went strangely quiet, like even the house wanted to hear what happened next. I blinked. "You sold it?" "Yes," he said like he was explaining property taxes. "It was valuable. It was just sitting there." "It wasn't just sitting there," I said, my voice sharpening. "It was Mira's." Delaney finally looked up, eyes bright with annoyance. "She's 11. My mom set her mug down with a soft clink. Talon, don't start. Don't start, I repeated because I couldn't believe I was hearing these words in this order. You sold my daughter's cello. My dad leaned back in his chair. It was a family asset. No, I said. It was set aside for Mira. Evelyn was clear. Delaney actually laughed. And my kids are what chopped liver her kids. Jude and Poppy. They weren't even in the room, and somehow they were still the main characters. My mom waved a hand toward the backyard like she was presenting a charitable project. We're doing something nice for the children. The children, I echoed, and my voice got colder. You mean Delaney's kids? They deserve space, my mom said like she expected applause. They deserve a backyard they can enjoy. And Mira doesn't, I asked. My dad rubbed his forehead, already tired of me being a person. Mira will be fine with a student cello. You can rent one. Plenty of kids do. Mira will be fine. That was my family's favorite prayer. It meant we did what we wanted and we're not dealing with your feelings. I forced my hands still on the counter because they were shaking and I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing it. Where is it? I asked, quieter now. Who did you sell it to? My dad shrugged. Some collector. He paid by wire. Quick sale. Of course. Quick. Clean. Convenient. Like Mira's life was just clutter they'd cleared out. I stared at him. How much? My dad didn't hesitate. 87,000. The number landed like a punch. Not because I hadn't known it was valuable, Evelyn had warned me, but because hearing it out loud made the backyard make sense in a way that made me sick. $87,000 didn't disappear. It turned into rebar and stone and shimmering water. Delaney's mouth curved in a smug little smile. So, yeah, we finally did something nice around here. Something nice. I looked at my mom. Evelyn gave that to Mira. My mom's eyes sharpened. And before you get any ideas, you are not telling her. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. Excuse me. She doesn't need stress, my mom said, voice clipped. She's settling in at her facility. Professionals are taking care of her. Let her have peace. You mean let you have peace, I thought. My dad's expression hardened. Don't make this about you. I let out a laugh that wasn't a laugh, sharp and humorless. It's about my kid. Delaney leaned forward, her voice going sweet in that fake way that makes you want to check your wallet. Talon, honestly, you always act like Mira is some tragic orphan. She's fine. She has you. The way she said you made it sound like a punishment. I pictured Mira in that music room, standing in an empty corner like she was waiting for someone to tell her she mattered. I turned away before my face did something I couldn't take back. I walked back down the hall, my steps louder now, not caring who heard. When I pushed open the music room door again, Mira was still there, still in the same spot. Like she hadn't moved because movement meant acceptance. I knelt in front of her and took her hands. Her fingers were cold. We're going home, I said. Mira nodded without arguing. That was the worst part. She didn't even fight. She didn't say, but why? She didn't cry. She just folded like she'd been trained for this, trained to shrink, trained to adapt, trained to make it easy. As we walked toward the front door, my mom called after me from the kitchen. Talon, do not call Evelyn. Do you hear me? I didn't answer because I did hear her. I just didn't care anymore. Outside, the Florida air felt thick like I was breathing through a damp towel. Mira climbed into the car and buckled herself in carefully, like being careful could keep bad things from happening. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, my eyes catching the backyard one last time, the torn-up earth, the promise of a pool, the loud, expensive proof of what my family thought mattered. In the passenger seat, Mira stared at her hands. After a long minute, she said quietly, Maybe Great-Grandma didn't mean for it to be mine yet. Something inside me went very still, because that's what my family had done. They hadn't just taken a cello. They'd made an 11-year-old girl believe she was the problem. I drove us home with one hand tight on the wheel and the other wrapped around a decision I'd spent most of my life avoiding. If they wanted me to be easy, they picked the wrong day. And if they thought I was going to protect their comfort by keeping my mouth shut, they didn't know my grandmother Evelyn at all. That night I started gathering what I should have been gathering all along. Screenshots of Delaney's posts, photos of the excavation, messages in the family group chat, anything that proved the timeline. Because if they could do this when Evelyn was gone, I had to find out what else they'd been willing to take. The first night back at our place, Mira unpacked like she was trying to prove nothing had changed. She set her binder on the coffee table, lined up her pencil and eraser, and wiped an invisible smudge off the little tin of rosin the way Evelyn used to wipe the edge of a music stand. Precise, calm-like order could keep the world from slipping. I watched her from the kitchen while I pretended to care about dishes. I didn't want to hover. I didn't want to turn my grief into her burden. But in a one-bedroom apartment, there's no such thing as distance. Her teacher had loaned her a battered student cello for emergencies. That's what she'd called it, like this was a flat tire and not a theft. The instrument sat in a soft case that sagged at the corners, and the bow hair looked like it had been through a war. Mira handled it carefully anyway. That was her nature. She treated things with respect even when people didn't treat her that way. She started with scales, slow and obedient. The sound that came out was thin, tight, and a little sour. Not because Mira was playing wrong. Because the cello couldn't hold what she was trying to put into it. It was like listening to someone whisper through a door. Mira didn't complain. She didn't roll her eyes or slam the bow down. She adjusted her posture the way Evelyn had taught her: shoulders loose, wrist soft, breathe before the shift. She tried again, and again. But between phrases she paused longer than she should have, just a beat too long. Like she was waiting for the instrument to become something it wasn't. I leaned against the doorway, forcing my face into something neutral. "Sounds good," I said, because fathers lie when they don't know how to make pain smaller. Mira nodded like she believed me. Then she played the passage that used to bloom on Evelyn's cello, warm, rich, almost human. On this one it came out like cardboard. She blinked hard and kept going. When she finished, she rested the bow in her lap and stared at her left hand like she didn't recognize it. "I can still practice," she said quietly, not asking for reassurance so much as granting me permission to not fall apart. "It's just harder." "I know," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. She nodded, then said the sentence that made something inside me go cold. Maybe Great-Grandma Evelyn didn't mean for it to be mine yet. It was the same thought she'd whispered in the car leaving my parents' house. But hearing it again here in our cramped living room with that cheap cello in her hands hit different. It wasn't just a kid trying to make sense of a bad situation. It was a kid taking the blame so the adults didn't have to carry it. "No," I said more firmly than I intended. Mira's eyes flicked up, startled. "That cello was yours," I said. "Evelyn gave it to you. You didn't do anything wrong." Mira looked down again. I know she whispered, but it didn't sound like she knew. It sounded like she was trying to learn it. After she went to bed, I sat at my little kitchen table and opened my phone. The screen lit up my hands, and I realized they were still shaking. My mother's voice echoed in my head. "Do not call Evelyn. She doesn't need stress. Let her have peace." It hadn't been peace they wanted for her. It had been silence. So I did what I should have done earlier in my life. I stopped trying to keep everyone comfortable and started collecting proof. Delaney's Instagram was a running documentary of the backyard. Week 1, a giant hole with a caption like "Big things coming." Week 2, rebar and concrete forms worth every penny. Week 3, pallets of pavers for the kids. Week 4, a pergola frame going up like a stage set. Week 5, pool equipment lined up like trophies. Week 6, shimmering water under Florida sun, and Delaney posing with a drink like she'd personally invented summer. Every post made my stomach turn. Not because I hated happiness, because I recognized arrogance, because I recognized the way my family could steal something and then smile as if they'd earned it. I took screenshots of everything: the hole, the rebar, the invoices Delaney accidentally caught in the background of a story, the group chat messages about contractors coming early, the cheerful captions that might as well have read, "Look what we got away with." Then I scrolled back further, looking for any mention of Evelyn's move. There it was. Marjorie posting a photo of Evelyn's new place with a caption about keeping Mom safe and less stress for everyone. Everyone. like Evelyn's life was a nuisance my mother had finally solved. I wasn't doing this because I wanted to play detective. I was doing it because the truth in my family only mattered if you could hold it up in your hand like a receipt. The next day I called Mira's teacher. Her name was Mrs. Hart, and she had the kind of patience that can only come from spending decades with kids who cry in practice rooms. "I hate to ask," I said, keeping my voice low because Mira was in the next room. "But that loner, it's not working." There was a pause. I can hear that she said gently, "Mira's musicality is beyond that instrument." I swallowed. "Is there anything better, a rental? Something affordable?" She didn't sugarcoat it. Quality rentals aren't cheap, but I might know someone. "Let me make a few calls." A few hours later, she texted me an address in Sarasota, an old music shop near downtown that smelled like wood and history and money. I took my lunch break and drove over. Inside, violins hung in glass cases like jewelry. A woman behind the counter asked what I needed, and when I said cello rental, her eyebrows lifted a fraction like she was mentally calculating whether I belonged in the building. I didn't blame her. I didn't feel like I belonged either. She brought out 3 options. The first sounded like Mira's loner, thin and stubborn. The second had more body but felt stiff under the bow. The third wasn't Evelyn's cello. Nothing was. But it responded. It held sound the way a real instrument should. It didn't fight back. I closed my eyes as I listened to the staff musician play a few bars. The notes filled the shop like they were supposed to. For a moment I could imagine Mira sounding like herself again. Then the woman slid the rental contract across the counter. The number at the bottom punched me right in the chest. I did the math in my head the way single parents do rent, groceries, gas, school fees, the endless little costs that show up like mosquitoes in Florida. I thought about overtime. I thought about cutting everything that made life feel human. I thought about the fact that my parents could wire away $87,000 like it was nothing and tell me to just rent one. I signed anyway. Because Mira's voice mattered more than my pride. When I brought the rental home, Mira's face didn't light up the way it used to when she opened Evelyn's case. She just nodded politely and said, "Thank you." That politeness made me want to scream. Kids shouldn't be polite about having their futures stolen and returned in installments. She played that night and the sound was better. Not right, but better. The notes had room to breathe. Mira's shoulders lowered by a fraction like her body was finally letting itself exist again. Still, she didn't smile. She just played serious and quiet like joy was something she didn't trust anymore. 2 days later, I drove to see Evelyn. Her new place wasn't the gloomy nursing home my mother implied whenever she wanted sympathy. It was bright and clean and controlled lemon cleaner and expensive hand soap, a lobby that looked like a hotel. The staff greeted Evelyn by name with respect, not pity. Evelyn was in the lounge with a book open on her lap and her glasses perched at the end of her nose like she was judging the author personally. She looked up the moment I walked in. "Sit," she said. "Your face is doing that thing." I sat across from her and for a second I didn't speak. I felt like if I started, I wouldn't stop. Evelyn waited. She didn't rush me. She didn't soften it with small talk. She was the only person in my family who understood that silence can be a kind of courtesy. "They did it," I finally said. Evelyn's expression didn't change. "Tell me." So I told her. The empty corner in the music room. Glenn saying, "We sold it," like he was discussing lawn fertilizer. Marjorie's order not to tell her. Delaney laughing. The words, "family asset." Evelyn listened without interrupting the way people do when they're collecting evidence. When I finished, she closed her book slowly and rested her hands on top of it. "And Mira?" she asked. "She went quiet," I said. "She asked if you changed your mind." Evelyn's mouth tightened, not with sadness, with something sharper. Clarity. "She thought it was her fault," Evelyn said softly. I nodded. Evelyn drew one breath through her nose. Then she asked, "When did you last see the file? What file?" "The documentation," she said like she couldn't believe I'd forgotten. "Appraisal. Photographs. Identifiers." You showed me, I said. Months ago. Good, she said, and I didn't know why that word carried relief until she leaned forward. Do you have pictures of the yard, she asked. Anything that shows the excavation started right after I moved, I have screenshots, I said. Delaney posts everything. Evelyn nodded once satisfied. Send them to me. I stared at her. Evelyn. Are you okay? She looked at me over her glasses. I am not the one who should be worried. Then she reached for her phone. I didn't ask who she was calling. Evelyn always kept her cards close. My family used to call it old-fashioned. It wasn't. It was strategic. She made the call in a low voice, turned her body slightly away, then hung up. I will handle it, she said. I blinked. How Evelyn's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Not with yelling. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her grip was warm, firm. Mira will have her cello, she said. My throat tightened. How do you know that Evelyn's eyes sharpened? Because it was never theirs to sell. I felt my body go still. What does that mean? Evelyn studied my face like she was deciding how much truth I could carry. Then she said, Not today. I'll explain when it matters. She stood up smooth and steady. Go home, she said. Be with your child. Let her practice. Let her feel normal where she can. And my parents? I asked. The word came out bitter. Evelyn's smile didn't reach her eyes. Let them enjoy their pool. I drove home with the strange sensation of having stepped into a room where the air pressure changed. And then on the surface, nothing happened. No screaming calls, no public fallout, no apology. Just the steady drip of Delaney's posts as the backyard transformed from a hole into a showpiece. Mira went to school. She practiced. She got quieter in ways that didn't show up on report cards. I kept collecting screenshots. I kept my mouth shut. Not because I was afraid. Because Evelyn had told me something was moving, and for the first time in my life I trusted someone else to steer. 6 weeks passed. Then the invitation hit the family group chat like a flyer slapped onto a pole. BBQ Saturday, 2 p.m. pool reveal. Bring a side if you're coming. No, we miss you. No, how's Mira? No mention of the empty corner in the music room. Just logistics, because in my family feelings were optional, but potato salad was mandatory. Mira glanced over my shoulder as I stared at the screen. Are we going? She asked. Her voice was flat, but I saw the little flicker of hope hiding under it. Not hope for the pool, hope for belonging, hope that maybe if she acted normal enough the world would return what it took. I opened my mouth and realized I didn't have an answer yet. The next morning my phone rang. Evelyn. We're going, she said. My chest tightened. Evelyn. What are you doing? I'm doing what I should have done earlier, she replied. I started to ask more, but she cut me off with the calm authority she'd earned over a lifetime. Talon, she said, I don't want Mira watching you swallow this. A silence sat between us. Then she added, It's already in motion. I swallowed. What is the cello, she said. My heart kicked. What do you mean? Evelyn's voice softened just a notch. You'll see soon enough. I hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. Because suddenly that pool reveal wasn't a party. It was a stage, and Evelyn had chosen it on purpose. Saturday arrived hot and heavy, the kind of Florida heat that makes your lungs feel like they're working through wet cloth. Perfect pool weather. Perfect show-off weather. Perfect look-at-us weather. Mira wore her swimsuit under her clothes. I noticed when she reached for a t-shirt and hesitated, then chose one that was a little too big. Like hiding her body was safer than taking up space. She stuffed her towel into a tote bag and zipped it carefully as if neatness could keep things from going wrong. We drove to Lakewood Ranch in a silence that wasn't angry. It was careful. Mira stared out the window and didn't ask questions. She didn't ask about the cello. She didn't ask about Evelyn. She didn't ask why her grandparents could build a pool but couldn't say sorry. She just watched palm trees blur past like she was practicing how to disappear. When we turned onto my parents' streetcars lined both sides, I saw familiar vehicles from holidays and birthdays, cousins, aunts, uncles. A few neighbors I recognized only because my mother liked to mention them by name as proof she had a social life. This wasn't a casual BBQ, this was a presentation. We parked a block away and walked. I could hear laughter before we even reached the backyard. The sound carried over fences and manicured lawns like it was meant to. At the gate, I paused with my hand on the latch. Mira stood beside me, towel tucked under her arm chin, slightly lifted like she was bracing for impact. "You okay?" I asked. Mira nodded once. "Yeah." The word didn't match her eyes, but I let it go. I opened the gate. The backyard looked like an ad. Blue water shimmered under the sun. Stone decking so clean it looked newly scrubbed. A pergola with string lights like my parents had watched one home improvement show and decided they were experts. New loungers lined up like soldiers. A little outdoor speaker played soft music that didn't fit the mood, like the yard was trying to pretend nothing had been built on top of something stolen. Jude was already in the pool, splashing like a tiny shark. Poppy floated on a bright inflatable oversized sunglasses on her face because of course she had them. People laughed and cheered every time Jude cannonballed like he was a celebrity. Delaney stood near the shallow end holding a drink and talking loud, laughing louder, performing motherhood like she was on a stage. She had that glow people get when the world is giving them what they think they deserve. My mother stood near the grill with her shoulders back and her smile polished matriarch energy. The kind she practiced in mirrors. My father hovered nearby, smiling like a man whose life choices had just been validated by chlorine. And then Mira and I stepped into the scene. My mother's smile flickered. Just a fraction. Not surprise irritation. Like our presence was a stain on her perfect canvas. Talon she called too bright. "You made it, hi, Mom," I said. Delaney's eyes slid over Mira quick and dismissive like she was scanning an item she didn't plan to buy. "Hey," she said. Mira nodded politely, barely moving her lips. "Hi." That was my daughter right there. 11 years old, trained by my family's atmosphere to be small. Jude shrieked and jumped into the pool again, and the crowd laughed. Someone clapped, someone yelled, "That's my boy." Poppy squealed as water splashed her float and Delaney scooped her up like she was royalty. Mira stood beside me with her towel folded neatly in her hands, not sure where to put herself. She wasn't invited into the circle of attention. She was tolerated at the edge of it. I watched her eyes drift over the backyard, the pool, the pergola, the new furniture, the little details my mother would brag about later. And then I watched her eyes stop, on the water, on the way the sun hit it, on the way people looked at it with pride, like she was doing the math without meaning to. This water cost her something. I put my hand on her shoulder. She leaned into it without looking at me. That movement, that tiny lean, broke my heart more than tears would have, because it meant she still wanted comfort. She still trusted me. Even while she was learning, she couldn't trust the rest of them. My dad clapped his hands like a host. "All right, everybody, food's almost ready." People cheered. A few moved toward the table where my mother had arranged sides like a magazine spread. My mother laughed the soundlight and practiced. "And before we eat, we just want to say, this has been a long time coming. We're so happy to finally have a backyard the kids can really enjoy." Applause. Real applause. Delaney raised her glass. "To family," she said. More applause. My stomach twisted. Mira's fingers tightened around her towel. In that moment, I understood something with brutal clarity. They weren't just celebrating a pool. They were celebrating the fact that they could take something from Mira and still be praised for it. Someone near the grill asked casual, as if it didn't matter. "Where's Evelyn? Isn't she coming?" My mother answered too quickly. "Oh, she's busy. The heat isn't good for her. She's resting." The story sounded rehearsed. Evelyn is fragile. Evelyn is old. Evelyn is absent by choice. Evelyn is a sweet little woman who shouldn't be bothered with adult decisions. It was a neat narrative, a comfortable one, and I could feel how badly my mother wanted everyone to accept it. A second person asked, I thought Evelyn loved a good get-together. My mother's smile tightened. She does, but she's happier at her place now. It's easier for her. Easier for you, I thought. My father stepped in tone casual. She's being taken care of. That's what matters. Taken care of. Like Evelyn hadn't taken care of all of us in one way or another at some point. Like she wasn't the reason my parents had anything worth showing off in the first place. I saw an aunt glance at Mira and then look away quickly, uncomfortable. People could sense something. They just didn't know what they were sensing. Delaney moved to the table and started handing out plates, playing generous. Eat up, everybody, we've got burgers, hot dogs, you name it. Jude ran dripping across the deck, leaving wet footprints on the new stone. My mother didn't scold him. She laughed like it was adorable. If Mira had done that, Marjorie would have snapped towel off Honey with that smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mira stayed dry, stayed quiet, stayed careful. She was standing outside the family even while she was in the middle of the backyard. I watched my father soak in the attention, neighbors complimenting the landscaping cousins, asking about the contractor, someone joking about how this must have cost a fortune. My dad laughed and shrugged like it was nothing. You know, he said, you work hard, you treat yourself. My jaw clenched, because I knew exactly what had paid for that water. Then I heard it. Someone behind me, a cousin I hadn't seen in months, said, "Hey, didn't Mira have that beautiful old cello Evelyn gave her? Is she still playing?" The question was casual, innocent, but it cut through the noise like a blade. I felt Mira stiffen beside me. My mother's head snapped up so fast it was almost comical. Her smile appeared instantly perfect and too bright. "Oh yes, she's still playing," she said. "The cello is being taken care of. You know, maintenance. Maintenance." There it was. Clean, simple, believable. My father nodded like it was settled. "We're keeping it safe," Delaney added. "It's a delicate instrument. We're just being responsible." The three of them said it like a chorus, like they'd practiced the line in the mirror before the guests arrived. Mira's eyes stayed on the ground. I could feel her swallowing words. I wanted to grab that lie out of the air and crush it in my fist. But I didn't. Not yet. Because I remembered Evelyn's voice on the phone. "We're going. It's already in motion." I forced my face into something neutral and rested my hand more firmly on Mira's shoulder, a quiet promise I hoped she could feel. The laughter around us kept going. The music kept playing. The pool water kept shimmering. My family kept performing. And then from the corner of my eye, I saw the backyard gate shift slightly. Not opening, just moving. Like someone on the other side had placed a hand on it. My pulse kicked. Mira looked up, following my gaze. For the first time since we arrived, her expression changed, curiosity flickering through the guardedness. The gate trembled again, subtle but real. And in that tiny movement, I felt the entire backyard, every smile, every lie, every practiced line hold its breath. The gate settled behind us, and the backyard noise rolled over Mira like surf laughter splashing the clink of ice in plastic cups. She stood close enough that I could feel the heat coming off her shoulder through her t-shirt. That alone told me she wasn't fine, no matter how steady her face looked. I guided her toward the far edge of the yard where the fence cast a thin strip of shade. It wasn't much, but it was quieter. Away from the center of the performance. Away from the part where my mother's smile lived. "You want to sit for a second?" I asked. Mira shook her head immediately, like sitting would look like needing something. "I'm okay," she said. Then softer. "Really, I'm okay." The words were automatic. A script. Something she'd learned in a house where fine was the only acceptable emotion unless it was coming from Delaney's kids. I swallowed the urge to argue with her and just nodded. "All right. Stay right here, okay? I'm gonna grab you a drink." Mira's eyes flicked to the pool and back to me, and for a second I saw the kid inside her, the one who still wanted to be part of the day. "Can I go in?" she asked carefully. My chest tightened. I glanced at the water, at Jude shrieking as he cannonballed at Poppy on her float with her tiny sunglasses. The pool looked innocent. It wasn't. It was a monument built out of something stolen. If you want to, I said, choosing my words like glass. But only if you feel like it. Mira nodded, then added quickly, "It's okay if we don't." I don't care. Another lie. Another way of making herself smaller so the adults around her wouldn't have to feel guilty. "I'll be right back," I said again, and I forced myself to step away. The table was crowded with relatives and neighbors filling plates like nothing in the world was wrong. My mother moved between them with the confidence of a woman who believed the yard and the narrative belonged to her. My father stood with a beer in his hand, laughing at a joke I couldn't hear. Delaney floated through it all like she was hosting a talk show, one hand on her drink, the other occasionally waving toward the pool like it was a prize. As I reached for a stack of plastic cups, Delaney's voice rose just a little loud enough to travel. "Mira might switch to something else," she said, smiling, as if she were being helpful. "Kids change their minds all the time. It's not like one instrument is the whole world." A couple people chuckled politely the way they do when they don't want to get involved. My jaw clenched. I kept my back to her and poured lemonade into a cup until the ice floated up. Delaney kept going the way she always did when she sensed an audience. "Plus, let's be real," she said. "An 11-year-old doesn't need some museum piece. A normal student cello does the job." I turned slightly, just enough to catch my aunt's face in my peripheral vision, tight, uncomfortable. Someone else looked at their plate a little too hard. People could tell Delaney was aiming at something. They just didn't know exactly what. Then a voice cut through the air, older, sharper, less willing to play along. "Hold on," my Uncle Ray said, stepping closer with his paper plate. "I thought Mira had Evelyn's old cello. The beautiful one. Is she still playing?" That the backyard seemed to shift. The laughter didn't stop, but it changed like the rhythm of it stuttered. My mother's head snapped up and her smile appeared so fast it looked painful. "Oh yes," Marjorie said brightly. "Of course she's still playing. The cello is being taken care of." My father nodded in sync like they were a practiced duo. "Maintenance." Glenn added casual as a weather report. "It's delicate. We're keeping it safe." Delaney lifted her glass and chimed in like a closing statement. "You know how those antique instruments are. It's better this way." The three of them held the lie between them like a tablecloth, smooth, clean, covering everything underneath. Uncle Ray frowned. "Maintenance," he repeated, skeptical but not wanting a scene. "Huh." My mother laughed lightly. "Evelyn was so particular about humidity and all that. We're just making sure it's protected." I felt heat crawl up my neck. It wasn't just that they were lying. It was how comfortably they were lying. Like truth was optional as long as the vibe stayed nice. I carried Mira's drink back toward the shaded edge, trying to keep my face neutral. If I looked furious, I would become the story. My mother would love that. She'd love nothing more than to point at me and say, "See, he's the problem. He always has been." Halfway across the yard, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I didn't even need to look to know it mattered. I stepped behind the pergola post, angled my body away from wandering eyes, and checked the screen. A text from Miles Ketter. "Don't let Mira be alone. Don't confront them before Evelyn arrives. Keep calm." My pulse jumped hard enough to make my vision sharpen. Evelyn was coming. Not maybe. Not we'll see. Coming. I stared at the message for a second longer than I should have, absorbing what it meant. This wasn't just me walking into a hostile backyard with my kid. This was coordinated, timed, deliberate. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and exhaled through my nose, slow. When I reached Mira, she took the cup with both hands and murmured, "Thanks," like she was afraid gratitude was the only thing she was allowed to give. "You doing okay?" I asked quietly. Mira nodded. Her eyes tracked the pool again, then dropped to the towel she was twisting in her hands without realizing it. "I'm fine," she said, then almost inaudible, "It's pretty." I looked at the water. "Yeah," I said. "It's pretty." I didn't tell her what I was thinking, that pretty things could still be wrong. That sometimes the prettiest part was the cover. A few minutes passed. People rotated in and out of conversation clusters. Jude shrieked again. Poppy splashed Delaney on purpose, and Delaney laughed like it was the cutest insult she'd ever received. Mira stood steady beside me, trying to look like she belonged in the scene. Then my mother called from the table, voice sugary. "Talon, can you grab a bag of ice from inside? The cooler's getting low." I knew that tone. An errand. A test. A reminder that even here, even now, I was still expected to be useful. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted to say I was busy parenting the child she'd sidelined, but I also knew refusing would give her a reason to perform concern. She'd widen her eyes and tell everyone I was being difficult. So I nodded once and turned to Mira. "Stay right here," I said. "Don't go anywhere. I'll be back in a minute." Mira's eyes flicked to mine. "Okay," she whispered. I walked into the house and the temperature change hit like stepping into a refrigerator. The hallway smelled even more strongly of paint and sawdust. The blue tape was still there. The tarp still covered the runner like the house was mid-procedure. The kitchen was full of noise, someone filling trays, someone rummaging through drawers, my mother's laugh bright and too loud. I kept moving, grabbed the ice from the freezer, and started back toward the door. That's when I saw the little office. It wasn't really an office, more like a cramped corner room my father used for bills and printer paper. The door was half open and a stack of envelopes sat on the desk like someone had been sorting mail in a hurry. A white shipping envelope lay on top, not addressed to me, not even fully tucked away, like it had been set down and forgotten. What caught my eye wasn't the envelope itself. It was the thin, glossy slip peeking out from under it, a receipt-looking thing with bold lettering at the top. Wire confirmation. My body went still. I stepped closer, ice bag sweating in my left hand, my heartbeat suddenly loud in my ears. The slip had a partial name on it, some company header, and beneath it a transaction number. A bank routing line. A date that lined up too neatly with the first week the backyard got torn open. Next to it was a yellow sticky note with my mother's handwriting, tight, sharp, impatient, "Call him back. He's asking questions. Don't mention Evelyn." There was also a scribble that looked like a name only half legible, something like Harrison or Har, followed by numbers I couldn't fully parse. I didn't try to read the whole thing. I didn't need to. I needed one thing, proof that the sale wasn't some vague, untraceable story. It was documented. It had paper. My phone was in my pocket. I pulled it out, angled it low, and snapped 2 quick photos, one close, one wider, to capture the header and the sticky note in the same frame. My hands didn't shake while I did it. That surprised me. Maybe rage can steady you when fear runs out. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. I slid the phone back into my pocket, grabbed the ice tighter, and stepped away from the desk just as my father appeared at the doorway. Glenn looked at me, eyes flicking briefly to the office, then to the ice bag. His smile turned on like a switch. "Everything good?" he asked, voice friendly for anyone who might be listening. "Just grabbing ice," I said. His eyes stayed on mine a beat too long. Uh-huh. I walked past him and pushed out the back door, the sunlight slamming into me again. The noise of the party rolled back over my skin, and for a moment I felt like I was carrying a secret under my shirt like a live wire. Mira was still where I left her. Thank God. But Glenn wasn't far behind me. As I crossed the deck, he angled toward me, intercepting me near a narrow path between the table and the pergola, close enough that his words wouldn't carry, but his smile could still be seen. "Don't do anything stupid," he said quietly. The friendliness gone from his eyes while it stayed on his mouth. "Not in front of everyone." I looked at him steady. I'm not the one who sold a child's instrument. His smile tightened. "Here we go." My mother appeared like she'd been summoned, her expression already assembled, concerned, gentle, reasonable. "Talon," she said, stepping closer. "Please. Not today." Mira's sensitive. I stared at her. "Mira's sensitive," I repeated, tasting the manipulation in the words. "Yes," Marjorie said, touching her chest like she was a wounded saint. "And you get worked up. You make things worse. You know how she is. She'll take on everyone's emotions." There it was. If the day fell apart, it would be my fault. If Mira cried, it would be because I upset her. If anyone started asking questions, it would be because I couldn't just let things go. My mother was building a shield out of my child, and Delaney drifted over, drawn by the tension like she fed on it. Honestly, she said, faux sympathetic, can we not? We're trying to have a nice day. A nice day. Mira stepped closer at that exact moment, like she could sense the air changing. Her eyes flicked between the adults, and I saw the split second where she decided what her job was. She lifted her chin and spoke softly, quickly. It's okay, she said. I'm okay. I'm not upset. It's fine. The words came out too smooth, too practiced, like she'd said them 1,000 times to keep adults from exploding. My throat tightened. I looked down at her 11-year-old shoulders, drawn in, trying to manage grown people's comfort like it was her responsibility. I crouched slightly so my voice would land where it mattered. You don't have to do that, I said quietly. Mira blinked. Do what make it easier, I said. You don't have to make it easier. Mira's mouth trembled for a second, then she pressed her lips together, fighting whatever wanted to come out. Behind us, my father's voice stayed low. We've got people here, he said. Don't embarrass us. I stood up slowly, the heat in my chest turning into something steady. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't make a scene. I just looked at Glenn and Marjorie and Delaney and realized they didn't care about embarrassment. They cared about control. And somewhere in my pocket, my phone held proof that control had a paper trail. I felt Mira's hand slide into mine. I squeezed it, and I looked toward the backyard gate again. It didn't move this time, but I could feel something coming through it anyway. I didn't let Mira drift back toward the pool after that, not because she couldn't handle the water, because I couldn't handle losing sight of her. My family didn't just take things. They took moments, small chances to twist a kid's feelings to plant a sentence that stuck. So I guided her along the side of the house where the noise softened and the shade stretched longer. The grass was cooler there, the air still heavy, but at least it wasn't full of applause. Stay where I can see you, I told her gently. Okay. Mira nodded. She didn't ask why. She didn't argue. That obedience earned by years of being treated like an inconvenience made my stomach knot. We stood near a row of hedges half hidden from the yard. The muffled sounds of the party drifted over music, laughter, the occasional splash. My phone buzzed again. I glanced down. Unknown number. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Everything in me wanted to keep this day contained, to keep Mira in a bubble where adults couldn't hurt her anymore. But some instinct, the same one that made me photograph that wire confirmation, told me this wasn't random. I answered. Hello, a man's voice, professional and careful. Is this Talon Pierce? Yes. I'm calling regarding a transaction involving a musical instrument, he said. A cello. I'm trying to reach Glenn Pierce. My spine went rigid. I'm his son, I said slowly. What is this about? There was a pause, like he was deciding how much to say to the wrong person. We represent a buyer, he said finally. Or more accurately, we represent the party who facilitated the purchase. We've been contacted regarding a dispute over ownership. My mouth went dry. Dispute. Yes, he said. A report has been filed. We've been notified that the instrument may not have been sold by someone with legal authority to do so. My heart started thumping hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. Who filed the report? I asked, already knowing. I can't disclose that, the man said. But we need to verify facts. If the instrument was recovered or if a recovery is in progress, we have obligations. It becomes a matter of unwinding the transaction. Unwinding. I looked at Mira. She was watching my face, her brows drawn together, the child in her sensing danger, even if she didn't have the vocabulary for it. I turned slightly away from her, lowering my voice. I'm not going to discuss details, I said, but you should speak to my father. We're trying, the man replied. He hasn't answered. A sharp, ugly thought crossed my mind, Glenn, ignoring consequences the way he ignored everything else. If you need a response, I said carefully, you can put your request in writing. We will, the man said. I'm calling as courtesy before formal steps. If the instrument is not returned and if funds are not addressed, it escalates. Okay, I said, forcing calm into my voice. "Talk to him." "I intend to," the man replied. "Thank you." The call ended. For a second, I just stood there, the phone still against my ear, listening to nothing. Then I lowered it and stared at the screen like it might explain how my family had managed to drag strangers into their mess so fast. Evelyn's plan had reached outside the backyard. That meant two things. One, the truth was no longer trapped in my parents' house where they could control it. And two, Glenn and Marjorie were about to panic. I slipped my phone into my pocket and looked at Mira. "What is it?" she asked quietly. I took a breath. "Nothing you need to worry about right now," I said, hating myself for the softness of it. "Just stay close." Mira nodded, eyes dropping to the grass. "Okay." We walked back toward the party, and I felt the air change before I even saw them. My father stood near the grill, but his posture was different, less relaxed, more rigid. He kept glancing at his phone like it had grown teeth. My mother's laugh sounded a fraction too high. Delaney had pulled Marjorie into the pergola corner, their heads close together, voices tight and quick. When Marjorie looked up and saw me, her eyes flashed with something that wasn't hospitality. Fear, anger, both. She recovered fast, she always did. Her smile switched on as someone walked past. But when she looked back at me, the smile vanished again. The party kept going because parties are stubborn. People refill plates. Kids splash. Neighbors compliment the pavers. But the performance had a tremor running through it now, like a stage with loose bolts. A hand touched my elbow. I turned and saw my cousin Jenna, someone who wasn't close enough to be trusted with family secrets, but close enough to notice when the vibe shifted. "Talon," she said, voice low. "What's going on?" I held her gaze for a moment and weighed my options. If I lied, I would be helping my parents keep control. If I told the whole truth, I'd ignite the yard before Evelyn got through the gate. So I chose a single sentence. A fact, nothing dramatic, just reality. "The cello was sold," I said. Jenna's eyes widened. "Sold." I nodded once. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked past me toward the pool, toward Glenn's forced smile, toward Marjorie's bright laughter that didn't match her eyes. Jenna swallowed. Talon, that's insane." "It is," I said. She looked like she wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but instead she just whispered Mira. Mira stood close at my side, staring at the deck boards, listening without looking like she was listening. Jenna's face softened in a way my mother's never did. Jenna nodded once like she'd made a decision, then drifted away, quiet, thoughtful, no longer part of the cheering crowd. And just like that, a crack opened in the wall my parents had built around their image. Glenn saw it. He moved fast, stepping toward me with a smile that didn't belong on his face. "Talon," he said loud enough to sound friendly. Then he angled closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "We need to talk." "I'm not interested in private conversations," I said. His eyes narrowed. "You're going to leave," he said, calm and ugly. "Right now." I didn't move. Glenn's smile stayed in place for the crowd, but his words sharpened. "You're ruining this." "You did that," I said quietly. His jaw ticked. "You want to make yourself the hero, fine, but don't drag everyone into it. Don't drag the kids into it." My stomach flipped at the hypocrisy. Mira's fingers tightened around my hand. Glenn glanced down at her and then back up at me, using her as leverage. "Take her home," he said, "before she gets upset." I felt Mira press closer to my side like she wanted to disappear into my ribcage. She kept her face blank like blankness was safety. I leaned slightly toward Glenn, keeping my voice low. "I'm not leaving," I said. "Not until Mira is done pretending she belongs here, only if she stays quiet." Glenn's nostrils flared. "You think you can come in here and threaten us?" "I'm not threatening you," I said. "I'm stopping you." His expression shifted, annoyance turning into something harder. "If you do this," he said, "you're done. You'll be cut off. You'll get nothing. Do you hear me?" There it was. The old weapon. The family's imagined power. The idea that I would fold for access, for approval, for the illusion of being included. I looked at Mira. Her eyes were down, but her body was shaking just slightly, so small I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't been watching for it. My voice softened when I answered because the answer was for her as much as it was for him. "I can live without your approval," I said. "Mira can't live without her voice." Glenn's smile faltered for the first time in front of anyone close enough to notice. He opened his mouth probably to hiss something worse, and then his phone buzzed. His eyes flicked to the screen. Color drained from his face. Not all at once. Just enough that I saw it. He turned slightly away, thumb hovering like he didn't want to open whatever was waiting there. Then he did, and his shoulders went tight. Marjorie watched him from across the yard. She saw the change immediately. Her hand went to her chest like she couldn't breathe, and Delaney leaned in, whispering fast. The music kept playing, but the adults in my family were no longer relaxed. They were calculating. I felt Mira's grip on my hand change less limp, more intentional, as if she could feel that something was shifting in the ground beneath all the pretending. Then, clear as a bell over the noise, the backyard gate latch clicked. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried. Maybe because I'd been staring at that gate all day like it was a doorway to oxygen. A couple heads turned. Jenna turned. Uncle Ray turned. Even Delaney paused mid-laugh. The gate opened. A silhouette appeared in the frame, backlit by the sun. And I didn't need to see the face to know, because the air in the yard changed the way it changes when the one person your family can't talk over finally steps into the room. Mira's head lifted. My mother's smile froze. My father's phone hung useless in his hand. And for the first time since we arrived, the backyard fell into a hush that felt like the beginning of consequences. The gate opened wider this time. Not a hesitant push. Not a pause. Just a clean, deliberate motion that cut through the noise of the party like a blade. Conversations thinned out. Laughter stumbled. A few heads turned first, then many, then almost everyone. Evelyn Hartwell stepped into the backyard as if she had every right to be there because she did. She wasn't hunched. She wasn't tentative. She wasn't the fragile version of her my parents liked to describe when it suited them. She wore a simple dress pressed and understated, her hair neatly set her posture straight. Age had given her clarity, not weakness. On either side of her walked two men who did not belong to backyard barbecues. Miles Ketter I recognized instantly. The other, Rowan Winslow, held a thin folder tucked under his arm like it weighed more than it looked. The sound of splashing slowed. Jude climbed out of the pool, dripping and confused. Poppy sat up on her float, blinking behind her sunglasses. I watched my parents. Glenn went rigid, the beer in his hand lowering an inch like his arm had suddenly forgotten its job. Marjorie's face drained so fast it looked almost theatrical, her smile freezing in place before collapsing entirely. Delaney's laugh cut off mid-breath, her mouth still curved upward even as her eyes widened. They knew. They didn't need introductions. They didn't need explanations. They knew. Evelyn took in the yard with a slow, assessing glance. The water. The stone deck. The pergola. The light strung carefully overhead to make the whole thing look like a catalog spread. "Well," she said mildly, "you've all been busy." The words were light, but they landed heavy. Marjorie recovered, first stepping forward with the reflex of someone who had always controlled the room. "Mom," she said too brightly. This is a party." "I know," Evelyn replied. "That's why I came." She looked past Marjorie, then past Glenn, past Delaney, and her gaze found Mira. My daughter straightened without realizing it, her shoulders pulling back, her chin lifting just a fraction. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just stood there, suddenly very still, like her body recognized safety before her mind did. Evelyn's face softened for exactly one heartbeat. Then she turned back to the adults. "I've heard," she said calmly, "that you sold the cello." The yard went silent, not the polite quiet of waiting for a toast, the real kind, the kind where people stop chewing. Marjorie's mouth opened. "Mom, we didn't want to upset you." "You didn't want consequences," Evelyn said, cutting her off without raising her voice. Glenn stepped forward, his smile strained. "Let's not do this here," he said. We can talk privately. We've had plenty of private time, Evelyn replied. You used it. She angled her body slightly so that her voice carried not shouted, not dramatic, just clear, like she was addressing a group that deserved honesty. I won't take long, she said. I know you're all here to swim. Delaney scoffed under her breath. This is insane. Evelyn didn't look at her. She smiled instead. Not a warm smile, not a cruel one either, a settled one, the expression of someone who had already finished the work. The cello, was Evelyn said, and paused just long enough for the words to hook every ear held in trust. Glenn's face changed. Not confusion. Recognition. Evelyn continued, each word measured. I created the trust years ago. I am the trustee. Mira is the beneficiary. A ripple went through the crowd, quiet disbelieving. That instrument, Evelyn said, was never a family asset. It was never yours to sell. It was never yours to touch. Marjorie's lips trembled. Mom, you sold property you did not own, Evelyn said evenly. And you used the money to build this. She gestured lightly toward the pool. The water glittered behind her, suddenly stripped of charm. Miles stepped forward, then opening the folder. For clarity, he said, voice professional and firm, the instrument was recovered this morning after formal notice and coordination with the intermediary. Glenn's shoulders sagged. Recovered, not argued over, not pending. Done. Miles went on. The buyer was notified of the invalid sale. Funds are being addressed through appropriate channels. Mira sucked in a breath so sharp I felt it more than heard it. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just pressed her fingers into my hand like she was making sure I was real. Evelyn turned back to my parents. You took something that belonged to a child, she said, and you turned it into concrete. Delaney found her voice. It was for the kids. Evelyn looked at her then. Just once. Mira is a child, she said. That was all. Miles extended another document toward Glenn and Marjorie. This is formal notice, he said. You have 60 days to vacate the property. Marjorie gasped. This is our home. Evelyn shook her head. It's the house I allowed you to live in. Glenn tried to straighten. You can't be serious. Evelyn met his eyes. Try me. The yard had become something else entirely now. No longer a party, no longer a performance, just witnesses. I felt eyes on me, but I didn't look around. I didn't need to. I stepped forward just enough to be heard. Mira is not a second-tier member of this family, I said. She never was. I didn't add anything else. I didn't need to. Evelyn turned to Mira, then lowering herself slightly so they were eye level. You didn't lose anything, she said gently. It was taken. You didn't do anything wrong. Mira's face crumpled, not loudly, not dramatically, but with relief so deep it shook her. She nodded once, then twice, like she was finally letting the truth land. Evelyn reached out and rested her hand over Mira's. Solid. Certain. Behind us, the pool lights hummed. Somewhere a drink tipped over and spilled. The party had ended, and there was no putting it back together. The cello arrived the next morning, not in ceremony, not with applause. Just a hard case carried carefully up the stairs to my apartment. The delivery man waited while we unlocked it. Mira knelt on the floor, hands hovering for a moment before she touched anything, like she was afraid the permission might vanish if she moved too fast. Then her fingers rested against the wood light, reverent. She didn't say a word. She leaned forward and wrapped her arms around the case, pressing her cheek against it like she was confirming it was real. Evelyn stood behind her, allowing herself exactly one deep breath before composure returned. Miles updated us later that day. The intermediary had been forced to unwind the transaction. The buyer wanted his money back. Glenn and Marjorie were now facing a repayment demand that concrete and chlorine couldn't solve. The phone calls started almost immediately. Voicemails, emails, messages routed through Miles. Panic has a sound. It's thinner than anger, louder than guilt. Delaney distanced herself fast. The language shifted from, we decided to, I told them this was a bad idea. History rewritten in real time. Within the 60 days, Marjorie cried. Glenn argued. Both blamed me for doing this in front of everyone. I didn't respond. Everything went through the lawyer. The day they moved out was quiet. No shouting. No grand speeches. Just boxes and silence and a house finally breathing again. Evelyn placed the property into trust shortly after. Clean, protected, locked against future manipulation. Mira and I moved back. The first night there were no power tools, no forced laughter. Just the sound of Mira practicing in the living room, real sound, full and warm. A few months later, she auditioned for the youth orchestra. She stood taller, played without apology. And when she finished, she didn't look at me to see if she was allowed to be proud. She already knew. That was the real return. Not the cello, the voice. Sometimes the hardest part isn't losing something valuable. It's watching a child learn to make themselves smaller just to keep the peace. And maybe that's what this story leaves us with, not a victory lap, not a score to settle, but a quiet reminder that family isn't proven by blood or speeches at a backyard party. It's proven in the moments where someone chooses to protect the tender parts of another person without asking them to earn it. If there's anything we can carry out of Talon and Mira's story, it's this: we don't always get to control what people take from us, but we do get to choose what we teach the ones we love about their worth. Sometimes love looks like boundaries. Sometimes it looks like truth spoken calmly, in a room full of noise. If you'd like, tell me in the comments, have you ever had to draw a line with someone you thought would never cross it? And if these stories feel like a place where you can breathe, reflect, and feel less alone, I'd love for you to subscribe and stay with us. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other.